Okay, we're back in Blender here in this tutorial series, trying to get some 3D stuff into some live footage. We're in Blender. Hopefully you've had some time to play around, goofed off in it. Let's get started. So we've got our footage here in Explorer. We've got the footage called track. We want to bring in this short clip. It's 12 seconds long, 12 and a half seconds long, 25 megabytes. It's quite a small clip. Inside of Blender, there are a bunch of tabs, just like in Premiere, where you can go into different layouts of screens and stuff like that. And there's a bunch more. You can go into VFX compositing, because we're going to be VFXers, and motion tracking, things like that. But if you don't want to mess around up here, what you can do is you can go File, New, VFX. Don't save that one. And as you can see, it's the exact same thing. So as I said in the last tutorial, the options that they give you in here are really just layouts, default layouts for when you open a brand new file. So if you had a file open, you click General or you clicked any of these, it doesn't matter. All you have to do is go into the tab that's up top, the Layouts tab, go into VFX, go into Motion Tracking, because we are going to be motion tracking. All right, so no problem. We're in motion tracking right now. The layout has completely changed. You're thinking, oh, what is happening? I don't know what's going on. It's all different because now we've got our 3D perspective up here. We've got something going on in here, and then down here is still the timeline, because Blender is an animation software as well as a 3D modeling software, so you can create animations, and just like Premiere, we have a timeline. Now there's nothing going on in our timeline, so if we drag around, nothing really happens. That's fine. Okay, so let's bring in our track. So let's shrink this down a bit. Something like that. And what we can do is we can just click and drag this in. So we're going to drag it into the video compositing area. And let's make this a little bit bigger. So this video tracking area is where we're going to do all of our work for a little bit. And if we see here, we've got a very steady shot. There's no move, not really any movement to it. Let's just take a quick look. And the first thing we want to do actually is make sure that the Blender file itself, like the length of this timeline, matches this, because it doesn't by default for some reason. When you drag a clip in here, Blender's still stuck at starting of 1 and end 250 frames. It's a default setting of Blender. So don't forget that Blender has not accommodated for your footage. As you can see, we go to 250 and past, there's still footage past here. I'm just using the scroll wheel. Remember, the scroll wheel is for zoom. So if we go past, we can see there's still video footage. So we want to get all of it in. So what we do is we hit set scene frames, and Blender will try to detect how many frames are in this video. And usually it's off by 1 or 2 or so. So we'll just go to the end here, and you see how I haven't reached the end of the timeline, but there's no video here. So here I'm scrolling to get the zoom, and then I'm shift middle button to move this timeline, as I said. So we're 2 frames over. So I don't know why Blender does this, but it's something to keep in mind. So at this point, we want to end the thing. So it's a couple frames in. Let's go 366. We'll just type that in there. And then the end of our timeline goes to the actual end of our footage. And that's pretty good. You can use this thing here to scroll along if you want. And I'm just going to zoom out because I want to see my whole timeline while I'm working. So this is our timeline, 1 to 366, because Blender starts on frame 1. And that's what we've got. So set scene frames. You can hit this button called prefetch. Prefetch will load in the video into memory, and that will tell Blender to work a little faster because it's in memory. So don't be such a slowpoke, Blender. And it will prefetch that into Blender. So Blender's struggling a little. Don't know why. It usually never does. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully it comes alive. But once this is finished prefetching and going into, there we go, goes into memory, then the next thing we can do is, nope, Blender's dead. It's kind of one of those things that you try to be patient for, and you hope that it recovers. Nope, we got it. Oh, almost. So you can see it's prefetching down here, so it gives you how much it's doing, but usually this is no time at all. Usually this does not take this long. It might be because I'm screen recording at the same time, so we'll just be a little bit patient. But once we get this prefetched, we're going to start talking about a little bit of these tracking settings and get our first track. Okay, Blender's finally done. Thanks for being patient with me. Now we've got this, so now it's quite quick. So everything's just sitting in memory. It doesn't have to read it from disk. So that's just a benefit. You don't have to do that. We can see we don't have a lot of movement. And when we're doing tracking, we want to take things that have an obvious look to them, something that is kind of contrasty. I mean, there's piles of stuff in here. We want to get some stuff that's a little bit close, especially where we want our thing to be, whatever our thing is. We want to get lots of tracks near the thing that the place where we want to put the thing. But we also want to get a couple of far ones to give Blender an idea of where this camera is in space. Because tracking is about duplicating the actual camera movement that you did or somebody did, so whoever took the shot. So you can see my hand or the whole camera moves down to the right here. So Blender needs to know that. Like where is this camera? What is this camera doing? So that's what we're doing. We're going to track this scene. We're going to 3D track this scene so that we can place stuff in it, and it's just going to be magic. Utterly magic. So the first thing we're going to take a look at over in the track tab. So you see here's the solve tab. Here is another tab that I never use called annotation. Is to solve and track. That's it. These are the two we're going to use. Don't worry about anything for now. Just solve and track. So we've got our clip here, and we can scroll in and out and stuff like that. So we're going to scroll quite a ways in, and then we're going to shift scroll and find something kind of obvious. And so what stands out to me is a lot of these marks on the ground. Gray, light gray, and then black. So that's perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the motion model, and there's plenty of times you can do location, rotation, and scale. But I've found through my experiences that either affine or perspective, which is going to, both of these measure sort of skew or deformations of stuff. They do the location, rotation, and stuff like that too. But because we have, it's not things that are just moving around, there's also going to be a bit of change of perspective. And so it sort of goes right, and there's a little up and down stuff. I just prefer to use either affine or perspective. Affine seems to work quite well. We could click this normalize, but we don't have a change in light, so you don't need to do that. So don't worry about that. And then for the match, I always like to use previous frame. So when we're tracking something, when we're telling Blender to track something, we want it to track not the keyframe, which is going to be the original frame that we started with. So if we start at frame 1, then and we start a track on this here, that's what it would use as a reference forevermore. And I think that it's a little more accurate to use previous frame. So we're going to do that. So the way we start a track is we hit Control and then left mouse button, and pow! It creates this little point that allows us to track. And I'm just going to go up into the clip display thing here. And I know when you look at this, there's so many things to click on. But trust me, there's not very much that we need to do in here. So we're going to go to clip display, and we're going to click on this little thing here that says search, and that's going to bring up what's called the search area. And then we're also going to hit info because I want to know the information that it gives. So that's what I do by default. And the other thing we should do really quickly is the 1, 2, 3, which looks like a printer pushing out some paper here. This is our scene. We want to change the frame rate to match the footage because Blender's default frame rate for animation stuff is set at 24. We've already got the right resolution, so nothing to worry about there. Unless your footage is different, just leave it. And then the frame rate 2997. And actually the other thing we should quickly do, I know this seems like, oh man, there's so much, but the second one here, which looks like a camera, which is the render properties. The other one was the output properties. I guess that's why it's a printer with some paper. Outputting. Okay. Just discover that now. So here in our render properties tab, because there's a lot of stuff, we want to go to color management. And we want to change this view transform. No idea why it's called that. It should be called color management. Color management. Because this is where the colored stuff does. Filmic to standard. See how that changed? Filmic, which is weird and strange, to standard. Look at all that detail that came back. Okay, so that's it. Let's just forget about this for now. So now we've got a track. We've got a track happening here. Or a track point. And if you want to see that in more detail and see what happens, you can open up here. This is our footage tab. Here's our track tab. Here's a stabilization tab and another annotation tab and all kinds of stuff. But we just want the track tab because it's going to show what we're tracking in great detail. And that can be kind of handy because you can move this around. You can say, you know, I just want it to be just a smidge this way. I want to track this dot here. So we start on frame 1, and we're just going to do our first track. And since we're all ready to go, we've got this here. This is our search area. It's a big search area. We don't need this much search area, and you can shrink that down and up and whatever. But luckily, we don't have to do a difficult track here. We're doing a simple track. And we're just going to hit one of these buttons, track forward or backwards. We can do one frame at a time, which is really tedious and slow. Don't bother doing that. Hit this button and pow, you should be done. Blender has tracked this point quite accurately, and we'll be able to see that if we sort of scroll along here. And if you want to watch up here, this is hard to watch unless you zoom in like that. But we want to see the whole footage. If we want to see the whole footage, then we can just use this bit here. And it looks like a good track. It's a very simple track. It has stayed on point. It hasn't moved an inch at all. So that is the very basics of starting a track. And we need 8 of these to solve a scene. So I would encourage you to give it a go yourself. Have a scene that is simple. And go ahead and track some points and stuff like that. But this is the very basics of tracking. So just to go over it one more time, you bring in your footage like this. You set your scene frames so that Blender knows how long, unless you want to put it in manually down here. You happen to know how many frames there are. Going into the render properties, change it to standard instead of filmic because filmic looks silly and standard looks good. And then make sure that your composition frame rate matches your footage. Otherwise, you'll get missing frames, or like if we left it at 24, then when we go to output it, we would be missing 5.97 frames per second. It would be odd. And if our footage was less than 29.97, say our footage happened to be 24 and we put it at 29.97, they would have to somehow add frames, which probably wouldn't do any blending of any sort. So important items, 2 important items. And then prefetch to make it quicker. And then you can leave these pattern size and search size all alone, especially for the most basic. And we change the motion model to affine to make sure that it understands any skew that could possibly happen. And I think it's just generally these are just algorithms that it uses to discover how something's moving around and then tell the camera what to do. Matching is going to be the previous frame. It could have been the keyframe since this is no big deal. The keyframe being the one that you set the track on first. That is the key frame. But I like the previous frame. It seems to me that I find it more accurate. but not always. But we'll discuss that in another tutorial. The big details aren't that important at the moment. We don't need to normalize. This is a common, I talk about it because it's a common thing that's clicked. So if we had a tree overhead and it was a sunny day, and there was some shadows going over top of it because there's a bit of wind, so the tree leaves are moving, and down here, this is going in and out of a bit of a light, then we would click normalize. We don't need that, so no big deal. And then by default, it's going to say footage over here, which to me has no real good purpose. I don't need this. I always need the track tab, and you make this a bit bigger so you can watch your track. And then down here are the buttons to do the tracking. So go ahead and give it a go on your own and see how it goes. And in the next tutorial, we'll cover the rest of the tracks and why we're tracking certain points.